Welcome, everybody. First of all, a couple of thank yous and a quick outline, and we'll get right into it. We'll have Q&A in just in less than an hour. Thanks to Doug Stanton for giving me the opportunity to sit down with these guys right here for an hour on stage. And thanks to Doug and his wife Ann and Grant Parsons for starting this series that has brought so many acclaimed, outstanding authors to our little Traverse City Opera House. And thanks to you for all coming out tonight and supporting this series. So the new book is out. We'll talk about the new book, The Deserter, which is the first collaboration between father and son here. We'll talk a bit about the writing process, about collaboration, about movies, about film, see what else we get into. I think you heard the bios, so we have a little idea of who we're dealing with here. I won't repeat any of that. But I would like to just get a little more background info and just say, for Nelson, Vietnam, people may be wondering, can you give us an idea of what you did in Vietnam, what that experience was, and what your arrival home was at that time?
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, I served, I was 3 years in college, and I had my student deferment, and I got bored one day. And January '66, and I said, I need some adventure. And I left college, and while I was thinking about what adventure I wanted, the draft board, I think within 30 days, had my name and number, and I got my draft notice. But I wasn't going to let them draft me, so I went and I enlisted. And then I served 3 years in the United States Army, went to officer candidate school at Fort Benning, graduated, trained troops for a while, spent a month in Panama and jungle training school, which was kind of a clue of where I was going after Panama. And spent a year in Vietnam with the 1st Cavalry Division. And you might know the 1st Cavalry from the movie Apocalypse Now. That was my unit. And came back, finished my degree, and had my belly full of adventure, but decided I wanted to write about my experience in Vietnam, which got me into the process of writing. I didn't really do that book right away. I didn't do that book until really Word of Honor many years later, and then a book called Upcountry years after that. But it was the Army experience. Thank you. Thank you. So that's, in a nutshell, that was my Vietnam. It seems like, as the years go by, it seems people ask me about Vietnam, I have trouble remembering, which I think is a good thing. But I did go back in '97. I went back with 2 other guys who had served at the same time I was there. One of them was a childhood friend, one was a recent friend. But coincidentally, we'd all been there at the same time, which was late '67 into '68, and that was during the Tet Offensive. And, probably the worst year of the war, 1968. We went back in '97. To kind of retrace our steps of where we'd been, what we'd done, looking for our old girlfriends who were 30 years older now, and hard to find. But it was kind of cathartic, and there was some, kind of emotional moments. We went there in January because we wanted to be there during the Tet holiday. So we'd been there during the Tet Offensive in '68, and we wanted to go at that specific time. And what came out of that was my book, Upcountry. I went there to write a magazine article, but the article got longer and longer and longer and longer, and I wound up with a book. So, in a nutshell, that's and there probably will not be any more Vietnam books unless somebody really insists.
And I wanted to ask, too, about the beginning of your writing career, poli-sci, history major, background in Vietnam, and a novelist. What led to your desire to write a book, and how did you get that first contract? How did you get that first contract to be published?
That's a good question. How did I get that first contract? Well, the reason I got into the writing, I think, was because, I grew up on like Hemingway and James Jones and Norman Mailer, the guys who'd been in World War II and wrote incredible, the great American war novels. And I think, being college educated and, being an officer and having seen combat, I thought I had this novel in me. So that really got me into the writing process. The first contract, long story, I'll try to make it short. I served with a guy, now I'll give him a shout out, Bob Reed. Bob Reed was an Australian who joined the American Army, and Bob said to me, Bob was getting out a month before me. He was getting out in October '68. I was getting out in '69, but Bob lived in New York, and I lived in New York. And we said, and this is the days before the internet and cell phones, Bob said to me, he says, I'm leaving tomorrow, I'm going home. If you make it, meet me at Bangor Arrows on 3rd Avenue, and he gave me a date. And I don't know if you know that bar, Mangano's. Can't even think of the name of it now, but it was a 3rd Avenue bar. It seemed like a good place to meet. So, and in fact, I did make it home. Met him there at the bar, and he had with him his college roommate from Hamilton College, a fellow named John Littell. John Littell had served also. John Littell, before he went into service, was a editor, a book editor. So at about 2 o'clock in the morning, with enough liquor in us, we decided that I was a novelist, and then I was going to write the Great American War novel. But it was a serendipitous meeting, and I think it's one of these things that, you live in New York, and this is where publishing is, and you're going to know people in the business. And people ask me about writing. I said, sort of like if you were a painter during the 1920s, you'd go to Paris. Well, if you want to be a writer today, it's good to go to New York. You don't have to live there forever, but it's good to go there to get the feel of the place, and also just meet people in the business. And it was a serendipitous meeting. And John and I stayed in touch. I didn't write the Great American Novel that I promised him that night in the bar, but until much later. But we stayed in touch, and then I started writing years later, and that's the first guy I went to. I said, John, I'm ready to come up with a book, and that's how that was an incredible contract. He's paying me $1,500 for this book. I mean. Even back in the 70s, that was not a lot of money, but I saw my name on the cover, and it was a big thrill. It was a paperback original. It was so bad looking back on it. I'm trying to find all those paperbacks, see if I can burn them all. I think they're all gone. I won't even read the name of it, but it's probably someplace on the internet. And I did a few of those, and that was my on-the-job training, and then I was ready for prime time. And again, because I lived in New York, I actually knew an agent who I'd met, and I got an agent. I got a contract with the major publisher, which was Harcourt Brace in 1977, and my first major novel, hardcover novel, was By the Rivers of Babylon, 1978. And I've been luckier than a lot of people who've been writing for many, many years and not being published. But it was a good experience. I did my time with the paperback novels. First major novel, hardcover, was well received, and that was 1978. That's 40 years ago.
21 books ago.
21. Right.
21 hardcovers ago. Alex grew up with a writer, novelist, and went into film. So you picked up a little bit of the storytelling gene, but why did you choose that path as opposed to writing books?
I was probably afraid to be compared to him. I mean, honestly, one of the greatest gifts that you gave me growing up with you was kind of the permission to pursue a creative career. So I did grow up. You see your dad writing books, like, oh, I want to do that too. I can do that. So I'd write short stories. I attempted a couple of ridiculously ambitious novels when I was like 22, but I decided that I liked filmmaking. It was kind of a fun hobby. I thought, oh, this is a hobby that maybe I could turn into something more. And I figured it's adjacent to what he's doing, so it's still a way to connect. It's a way to get feedback from him and still be in the creative world. So I moved to LA and I went to UCLA and got my graduate degree in film directing. And I met my wife there, which was probably the best thing to come out of that, going to that school. But it was a way to. It's hard, if you're from somewhere else and you go to LA, or you're somewhere else and you go to New York and you're trying to be there as a creative professional. It's really hard, I think, to build a network. I'm not talking about connections and networking of people above you that can help you. I'm talking about people, your peers, people trying to do the same thing as you, which is so important. So I went to Los Angeles, and I immediately had like 20 of my best friends who all wanted to also all be directors and screenwriters. So it was a nice community right off the bat, which made the move a little less intimidating, and the idea of pursuing this really, really difficult industry more a little easier. And yeah, so then I made some shorts. I was able to get an agent, film agent out there, and a manager. And I started writing my own screenplays, and I got into film editing, as was mentioned. And yeah, that's what I was kind of doing until I got a phone call one day.
Alex has a website, as does almost everybody these days, I think, with what's the 30-minute short with the title?
It's called The Absence.
Yeah, The Absence. If you want to check that out, I saw some of it today. Very intense, great storytelling.
Thank you.
So now father and son team up here for their first of 3 novels, a contract for 3 with the same characters. Just came out less than a week ago, so I have not finished it yet. The Deserter, which is fast-paced. I can't wait to get home and read it, and it's one of the reasons I was late today. Alex, can you give us a summary of The Deserter?
Sure. So The Deserter is a story about 2 agents in this Army CID, which is the Criminal Investigation Division. It's the branch of the Army which is responsible for prosecuting crimes or investigating crimes committed within the Army by Army personnel, or to Army personnel. And Scott, Brodie, Maggie Taylor, male-female CID team, are tasked with finding Kyle Mercer, Captain Kyle Mercer, and he's an infamous Army deserter, loosely based on Bo Bergdahl, though we changed him into a captain in Delta Force. And he, like Bo Bergdahl, had walked off of his base, been captured by the Taliban and held by the Taliban for 2 years. Unlike Bo Bergdahl, he escaped by himself and killed all of his captors, and leaves a very haunting message for his commanding officers in the Army. So Scott, Brodie, and Maggie Taylor. He's spotted in Caracas, Venezuela, and nobody knows why the hell he would go from Afghanistan to Venezuela. But that's the central mystery of the book. So our 2 CID agents are tasked with going to Caracas, locating him, detaining him, and bringing him back to face court-martial for his desertion. So there's a lot of mysteries up front. Why did he desert? How did he escape capture, and why would he end up in Venezuela? So there's a lot more to the story than bringing a deserter to justice, but that's kind of the entry point to it.
Yeah. And as I read, and if you are as well, or when you do, you'll continue to ask yourself, why did he desert? Why is he in Venezuela? And so on. I think maybe your second collaboration, Nelson, but the first here. So is it true when you called Alex to see if he wanted to work on this project, you asked him if he wanted to make some easy money?
He didn't say easy, right?
Something like that. As Ron said, I had for some reason my publisher wanted me to commit to a 3-book contract with 3 collaborations, with the same collaborator, if possible, but with the same characters, a continuing series of Scott, Brodie, and Maggie Taylor. And I had a collaborator up front. I didn't want to pick one because then, if it went wrong, then it was my fault. I'd like to blame authors for everything, but that's another story. We had a little contest, and we picked somebody who was a fairly, accomplished writer, but I couldn't get along with him for a variety of reasons. I think it's called clashing egos, and so I put the project aside. But the project was a good project. The publisher really was interested in this kind of takeoff on the Bo Bergdahl case, and I left it, while I was working on the Cuban affair. And then when the Cuban affair was done, they came back to me and they said, what are you doing with The Deserter? We actually had a name for it too. And I said, I'm looking for somebody to, wants to make easy money. And for some reason, I don't even know why, I was sitting in a chair one night, I was reading something, and it just struck me that I needed the collaborator. And I just, I said, I know somebody who writes, my son. And and I just called him out of the clear blue sky without much thought. And, he didn't exactly jump on it, even when I said, how do you want to make some money? Usually your children will respond immediately. But
I asked you, what do I have to do for it? And then you told me.
And yet, instinctively, I knew it was going to work. I really knew it was going to work, because I knew that Alex's strengths were, as a screenwriter, were bringing in this idea of, the arc of the story, as they say in screenwriting. Every story is supposed to be 3 acts: Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. So he knew all the structures. He knew how to pace a story, and he knew how to, he was a good storyteller. And I'd actually read some of the novels that he'd begun back when he was in college and post-college. So I knew he knew how to write. He knew how to write prose, beyond writing, dialogue for a screenplay. And instinctively I knew it was going to work. We had to just figure out the logistics. We don't live that far apart, about 20 miles apart. He lives in Brooklyn, I live in Long Island. It's not that far geographically, but it's worlds apart between Brooklyn and suburban Long Island. But with the internet and emails and all that, and you might want to talk about that process for a minute, the actual collaboration later.
I say so people know Nelson has written 21 novels now with a #1 pencil and a legal pad. That's how many legal pads do you go through on an average novel?
Gosh, I've probably leveled the forest by now. I don't type, and we all learned how to write in first grade with a pencil and a paper, and I haven't really progressed beyond that much. And but it works. It works for me. I mean, and all novelists, I'm going to defend my writing by hand. Novelists right up until the turn of the last century were writing, with a pen or a pencil. And Mark Twain was one of the first ones to use a typewriter. And there are people who will swear that his writing got worse when he went to the typewriter, because there's this machine in between you and your thoughts. And I actually spoke to a neurologist once who had done some work on this and said the same thing that I believed, which is the writing process with the hand and the brain directly, without anything in between, makes it go faster. This is what I tell everybody, because I don't know how to type, so it sounds good. But Alex is a quick typer, and he's got a computer, and he was emailing me manuscripts. And
I think I broke my brain pretty early, because I got like a computer in like early 90s, and it was a new thing, a personal computer in your house, and I was excited by it. So I think I just started typing, and that's that's also when I was like 11 or 12 years old. I started doing short stories on that, so that I was kind of immediately I was associating typing with creative writing almost off the bat.
So question is, can you read your dad's handwriting?
Most of it. I'd say it's hard to. I'd say about 95% of it, and then the other 5% I just was taking screenshots of the scribbles and emailing them to his assistants and saying, "What is this?" And then half the time they would tell me, and half the time they would say, "We don't know either. We're going to go upstairs and ask him." So.
So, Nelson, you would write something on your legal pad, have to take a screenshot of it, send it to your assistant to type it then into the Word format so that you would have a copy that way.
Actually, usually how it happened is I would email the typewritten pages. You would print them out, edit them, do your rewrites and revisions with a pencil, and if they weren't too extensive, I would get scans of the pages, with the pencil markings on them. So when I got an email, I'd open it, I'd immediately know if I'd screwed up or done a good job by how much pencil markings I could see on the page. And if he was doing more extensive, inserts of parts of chapters or rewriting something, your assistants would type it, and I would get typed pages. It just depended on how extensive the his reworking was.
So that's the mechanics of the collaboration there. I'm fascinated by writers, and I ask every writer I interview, and I get almost the same answer. They say, I don't know how it works. But if you think as a reader, in this book, you're getting to know Maggie and Scott, the CID investigating team, and Kyle Mercer is the guy they're after, and the bit players and they become people to you. You might have an image of what they look like. There are locations. You can imagine the roads, the hotels, and it becomes a world which we inhabit as readers, but doesn't exist, except in their heads, which is really fascinating to me. So I guess I would start on this book, The Deserter. What was the seed there? What was the first idea, and who did it come from? And what was the seed that got this going, that before you could collaborate together?
Well, it was the idea, I mean, that I had brought to the publisher years before of the Bergdahl desertion fascinated me. And I think because, I was in the Army, I was in a combat zone the way Bergdahl was in Afghanistan, and I couldn't imagine myself walking off my post into enemy territory. It just made no sense to me. And I said, this is a fascinating news story. But then when he was released and he was exchanged for some Taliban prisoners, and it turned out that he wasn't, after all, that interesting. In fact, he was kind of a loser. But that would not make a good novel. But it was a jump-off point. It was a starting point. I mean, I'm still not quite sure why Bergdahl deserted, but we had to come up with something interesting of why our guy, Captain, and he's a captain, Captain Kyle Mercer, Delta Force, would have deserted his post, left his men, gone off into Taliban territory, and what was that all about? That's one of the mysteries of it. So, like a lot of novels, you take something that you've heard or seen, something that interests you, and you have to dramatize it. You take a little literary license, and your jump off point has to be reality, unless you're writing fantasy novels. And I gave the project to Alex, kind of already half baked. We already knew we were going to do that, but then Alex had to go with it. And where is Bergdahl spotted? Alex picked like one of the worst places in the universe right now, Caracas, Venezuela, the murder capital of the world. That was his idea. And then he's spotted by an Army buddy, our guy, Kyle Mercer, who happens to be in Caracas on business. And the guy does the right thing, and he calls an Army friend who eventually goes up the chain of command. And when the book opens, we've already got Bergdahl spotted in Caracas, Venezuela, and our two heroes, our protagonists, are being briefed about going to Caracas, finding the Bergdahl character, Kyle Mercer, and bringing him back to justice.
Alex, I saw on your website you chose Venezuela. Where did he escape to? Where did he go? Venezuela, Caracas. You wrote, I also picked Venezuela because it's dangerous and therefore it's interesting. Part of a storyteller's job is to build a dynamic world and to put dynamic people in it and to throw everything you can at those people and hope they rise to the challenge or fail in an interesting way. Sending our heroes to Caracas seemed like a perfect way to screw up their day and see how and if they made it out alive. So when you began the collaboration together, that means you didn't know the ending? You don't have an outline that tells you, we're at point A, we have to get to point Z, and here's how we'll go? Or was it just open?
We kind of had an ending, but I in my mind, no, we thought the book was going to end, in Caracas. It was supposed to be, an urban thriller, but then Alex had the idea of, and sometimes it's the research leads you to places. Really looking at a map of Venezuela, I realized that the south part of Venezuela was part of the Amazon rainforest, and we decided that Kyle Mercer needed to get out of Caracas and wind up in the, we were both thinking the same thing, I think, the heart of darkness and Apocalypse Now, that we want this book to end in the jungle, in that dark kind of heart of darkness kind of place. Caracas was bad enough, the jungle turns out to be worse. And so now we got that far, but we still didn't know actually how it was going to end. And eventually you have to end it because you got to turn it in at some point. And that's where you have the real story conferences of, we had story conferences as we went along, of course. But the big one is always, how is this book going to end? A lot of people, are led down a lot of paths in the book. They like the book. And, when you read the reviews, a lot of readers complain about the ending. The ending was not satisfying. The ending was too quick. The ending wasn't believable. The ending this, and then the editors say the same thing. Not sure this is the right ending. And I think you found the same thing in the movie business. It seems to be all about the ending. And I have so much experience with with arguing with editors about endings, how things should end. We wanted to make this one the best ending we could, so we didn't have any blowback from the editors. So I said to Alex, make believe it's a movie, end it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the best endings are unpredictable, but then feel inevitable once they've happened. I'm not sure we did that, but that's always the goal, I think, good storytelling. You're like, of course, that's how it's the only way it could have happened, but it didn't occur to me until I saw it happen. And I know there's central mysteries to the book. So at some point we kind of paused and had a meeting to say, okay, the characters are asking themselves constantly, why did he desert? Why did he desert? Well, why did he desert? We had to figure out the central mystery, and once we had that figured out, that kind of answered. That was kind of like the center of the onion. Then it kind of gave us all the different layers of they're going to find this out, then they're going to find this out. That's not the plot. That's just the pacing of revealing information, and of course you have to figure out how you're doing it, and that's what makes it interesting. And then Kyle Mercer he's essentially a kind of Colonel Kurtz, Apocalypse Now character anyway. So once we decided on the jungle, of course it made perfect sense. Of course this is where he's going to go. And I figured you could probably describe the jungle pretty well from your experience. Yeah.
I was in the jungle once. Yeah. But yeah, once we got there, we knew it. The other mystery of the book was, not only why did he desert, but why did he go to Venezuela? And we had to come up with that. A lot of what a novelist does, I think, is some novelists work from a real good outline, like a 30 or 40 page real outline kind of thing. But I find that if you let it go a little bit and go off the roadmap that you've already plotted out, or if you have plotted it out, that sometimes more interesting things come up. As if, for instance, us thinking that this book was all going to be set, the last 3 quarters of the book were going to be set in Caracas until we looked at a map, and that just triggered the whole thing. So, you're living the book as you're writing it. The process takes 12 to 16 months, and during that time, you are living with the characters, you're living with the world of the book that you created, and you have the luxury of being able to go back to chapter 1 if you have to plan something that needs to happen in chapter 35. In the movie business, I guess, or in stage plays, they say, if you show a gun in Act 1, you better use it in Act 3. So we needed the gun, we needed the mystery, and we were really going along fine until we started painting ourselves into a corner. Like why did he go to Caracas? And why did he desert? I mean,
but we came up with great answers, you should say.
We came up with great answers, though, I think, anyway.
Can't wait to find out. You guys are not going to win any awards from the Caracas Visitors Bureau, that's for sure. Now, a lot of the Caracas Venezuelan research, Alex, you did. How realistic do you think you portrayed Caracas to the reader? We're talking about a lawless society, corrupt police, streets that close at dark, at dusk, government-sanctioned gangs, danger, robbery, murder around every corner, especially for Americans who are unwelcome. Is that fairly accurate, do you think?
Because I didn't go, I was a little self-conscious about the accuracy. And when I showed it I spoke to a number of Venezuelan expats, and when I showed them certain passages or certain chapters, and one woman said to me, I said up front, because I was like, listen, this is this is a thriller. It's a piece of commercial fiction. If it feels a little over the top or a little, sensationalized, that kind of comes with the territory. But I was just trying, And then she says, "No, not at all. This is like I was reading my life." I was like, "Oh God, that's horrible," And then I just they have to have a kind of dark sense of humor about it, even though every story you'd hear about every person who left had their own moment. I was riding in a car, and then in a upscale neighborhood, and somebody shot through the window of my car, and I almost hit me. Or my friend's boyfriend was arrested by the secret police and tortured for a week. Or and this is the stories of people who have money and means. Never mind the people who are just barely getting by and have to sift through garbage to find food. So it was a tough place to research because it's just a complex situation, and because it can be really dark. But what was the question?
What was the how do you believe that your portrayal is fairly accurate
I think
of
so.
the dangers that exist there?
Yeah, I mean, there was two things. The first was, are we describing the kind of topography and geography and how everything looks accurately? Because that's the first thing you need to make sure you're doing. And then it was okay if we were exaggerating a little bit, but we had to make sure it felt real. And no, I think it was accurate. I mean, there's these gangs. There's different kinds of gangs. There's drug gangs, and then the government themselves, outside of our military, they have their own gangs that they arm. They're basically almost like a lawless militia, but they kind of act on behalf of the president. And then there's all these other warring factions, and it's a complex and dangerous place. So I figured kind of anything we could come up with as far as a dangerous situation would be pretty believable. But the other thing is, it's still a place where you could go to a street, and it's not like Somalia. It's not, Baghdad in the middle of the war. It is still a place where there's shops open and there's malls, and people are sort of living their lives. But that's kind of what makes it a little eerie, because then suddenly, at any moment, something terrible could happen, and there's an entire cottage industry of people being, kidnapped for money. So no, I think it was pretty accurate.
Well, it's interesting. The last two books, The Deserter in Venezuela and then The Cuban Affair in Cuba, neither reflected positively on those countries because of their socialist government, basically, and leaders in history, which now is coming into our headlines here in the USA, the issue of socialism of one sort or other. Without getting too political, is that just coincidental? Or even your Scott Brodie here, his experience in Venezuela, he's a little disgusted with the citizens who still support Maduro and Chavez, and is supportive of freedom, and sad to see what's happened to their country. So is that a statement for the times, or just a coincidence because you happen to select these countries for your setting?
Well, partly it was coincidence. When I always wanted to do a book set in Cuba, and then when the country started opening up, I sought out an opportunity to go. You can always go to Cuba, but it just got easier. And it was it's a socialist country, and they are allied with with Venezuela. But no, I think it may be more coincidence than anything else. But having gone to Cuba, when I did go to Cuba, it was a little spooky kind of place. It's so close to Key West. It's so close to America, yet it's another world. When I wrote Charm School in 86, 87, I went to Moscow, and I found that place kind of spooky too. And so was Leningrad. It was like, but that was the Cold War. You kind of understood what was going on. And you understood, that this was a kind of an ascendant philosophy then that had been, kind of almost vanished in terms of, most countries of the world. So when I went to Cuba, I mean, a lot of what I write in The Cuban Affairs is our American hero wondering, what the hell is going on here? I mean, these Cubans have a lot of connections with Cubans in Cuba, with Cuban Americans who are so prosperous and so, economically miles ahead of the country they came from, and they're geographically close. But I think what I came away with was that it's a dictatorship. They can, and that's the same with Venezuela. The place is falling apart. But, whoever has the guns is in charge. It's that simple. It's not, will there be a revolution? I don't know. When I was in Moscow in '87, and I was writing Charm School, in my book, one of the characters says, because I felt this place was falling apart, and I said, one of my characters says, communism doesn't have 10 years left in it. And I remember my editor saying, that's kind of optimistic, isn't it? Well, it turned out it had 5 years left in it at that point. You can see it happening. You can see that this philosophy had burned out. And I saw the same thing in Cuba, and yet nothing is happening. And I think had we gone to Venezuela, we probably would have seen the same thing. It's a dead kind of philosophy, and dead, but what's keeping it alive is obviously the guys with the guns.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly on the surface we have different politics, but I think our ideas about authoritarianism and power are pretty aligned, and I've always liked that about my dad's books. I don't think they ever try to make any kind of obvious political point. They're more about larger issues, which don't really have anything to do with right and left. And no, I mean, I personally don't, I get too political here, but I think trying to draw just a line between Venezuela and, democratic socialists or whatever you want to call them in this country is pretty ahistorical and disingenuous, because it's what Venezuela is about authoritarianism. It's about megalomaniacs who seize power, seize the natural resources of their country, and control every aspect of people's lives. It's a dictatorship. It doesn't matter if it's the left or the right. And I thought that these larger, again, big kind of bird's eye ideas about power are a lot more interesting than trying to make any kind of particular point. I mean, maybe you disagree with me, but any particular point about a political party or another in this country. And then again, but then you also have the American security state that does get involved in other countries. And again, that's not right or left either. I mean, there's the George W. Bush's defense secretary was an Obama's defense secretary, and the George W. Bush's drone war became Obama's drone war. And there's these bureaucracies and these larger things happening that don't have to do with Republican or Democrat that I think are much more interesting, personally.
So that's the political portion of the show tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I think Nelson's website has Strand Magazine did an interview with you guys and asked both of you to pick your favorite thrillers, action adventures, intrigue, whatever you want to call the category of novel. And between the two of you, you came up with a lot of old school Brits, mostly,
yeah.
And Cold War subject matter. You've got John le Carré, Ian Fleming, Graham Greene, Joseph Conrad, James Grady, 3 Days of the Condor, or Len Dighton, and others. And are there any current writers that you would say you follow or admire or that do a good job in the thriller genre?
No.
All right. No. So here's I used to read Tom Clancy, when it was the 80s, I think.
Right.
And Clancy did a great job of research, and he knew the CIA. We believe he knew the CIA operations and the military operations and whatever his politics his characters were into. But after I read a couple, I thought there is absolutely no sex going on in these novels.
Right.
Nothing, not even close to it. And you right off the bat there, your team is a good-looking guy and a good-looking hot blonde from Kentucky. No, you put this couple together, and right away there, you might call it sexual tension, but right away for the reader, little subtext there, you're wondering about these two as they go in and out of these dangerous situations. And I think it was one of your other books, I just opened up one of the first pages that I had not read, and it's the same thing. How important, how intentional, how important is that to crafting a great novel?
Oh, well, very intentional, very important. My earlier novels might not have been that way, but, I grew up back to the Cold War. I grew up with Cold War novels, which is kind of informed some of my earlier novels. But a lot of these novels, and especially the British novels, had very little sex, even sexual tension. Le Carré did a little bit of it, and it's kind of interesting. American novels are different, but there was a time when we all watched these buddy movies. There were usually two law enforcement types. They're both guys, and there's always something missing. And what was missing, obviously, is that the protagonist's partner should be female, and that changes the whole picture. But it's also contemporary, without patronizing women when that's not what we're doing. CID, Army CID is full of female investigators, so we're not making it up. But we paired them together, and we made their personalities different. That just adds another dimension to the book. But but it also adds another way of looking at the world. Brodie, my guy Brodie, is very, very impetuous. He doesn't play by the rules. But Maggie Taylor plays by the rules. She's more intellectual than he is, and she's got instincts that he doesn't have. And it's you can do this with two guys, you can do it with two women, but it doesn't work as well. When it's male, female, the yin and the yang, that's also carrying the story. Even when there's not a lot happening in the story, and you're hearing these two talk to each other, that should be fascinating enough to bridge between the action scenes of how they approached the same problem. He's bound and intent on getting them both killed, according to her, and she's taking a little bit more has a more rational viewpoint of how to do this. And I started doing this many books ago with my John Corey character, and it worked. So, still works, I think. How did you feel about that? You hadn't done that before.
No, but I knew we were doing it, so I was on, and I thought it worked. It was fun. I mean, it was you sit down to write a scene. I mean, you think what were you saying about if the author's having fun, the reader's having fun. If the author is bored, then the reader's going to be bored.
Right.
And it was fun. You have the two characters sitting down, having breakfast, and they're talking over what they're going to do that day, and it becomes kind of a pleasure to write because you know that you can have this fun interplay between the two of them, and they're both smart in different ways. They're both brave in different ways. They're both stupid in different ways, and it kind of hopefully gives you kind of more of a respect for each of them if they're able to work together, and you find how they respect each other. I also like they're both. We didn't mention this. They're both combat veterans from different wars. He was Iraq and she was in Afghanistan. So that was interesting too when they were able to kind of tell the other one about their experience, or times when they had a common experience, or times when things were different between the two of them. So yeah, it was. I think it worked.
So when you write, you have this little romantic side story here, perhaps. At least the reader's wondering where that'll go, and you have a certain banter that develops between the two characters. Yet they're in dangerous, harrowing situations. How do you, what's the thought process in writing dialogue to go with that so you don't minimize the danger they're in with the banter that they're sharing at that moment?
Yeah, it's kind of like whistling through the graveyard. They're in danger. We know the danger. If they keep commenting on it, they're going to seem wimpy. They're going to, and I guess maybe this is from my experience in Vietnam. We didn't talk about it. And we were on patrol where anything could happen at any time, and yet it didn't stop the GI humor. Somebody had something funny to say about something every minute. I mean, dark humor, gallows humor, whatever you want to call it, whistling through the graveyard. You need to do this because you are in danger, and it doesn't trivialize the danger. I think it actually highlights it, that you know why are they doing this, why Scott Brodie is making jokes. He's making jokes because obviously he's tense. It worked in real life in Vietnam, and I think to some extent it works in the books.
I like the line when they get into the cab in Venezuela and they have a angry cab driver who hates Americans, and he says, "Are you Americans?" And Brodie and Taylor say, well, Brodie says, "No, we're Canadians." And he says, "Yeah, those Americans, they stole our culture, they stole our money, they stole our oil, they want to steal our oil." And Brodie says something like, "Yeah, they came and commandeered our Tim Hortons." So... all right, so movies. One of the books, General's Daughter, with John Travolta, Madeline Stowe, James Woods, big cast, came out, what, late 90s, early 2000s?
Late 90s, yes.
Late 90s, based on your book. You have a background in film and screenwriting. Now you're together with a great action thriller here. Are there plans? Would this transfer to the film medium, Alex?
I've never written a novel before, so therefore I've never adapted my own novel. It sounds really hard. I think I could do it. I think I would definitely need something between it. So we're working on a book right now, and the next kind of sequel to this book, maybe potentially after that. But I also think it's valuable to have another perspective, another writer, because it's not just about length. A script is only 90 or 100 pages, and that we have this big book. It's also about
Scripts, how many pages?
Well, let's say 90 to 120 pages. Let's say. I mean, the general rule is a minute a page, even though that's not really true. But that's the expected. If a producer picks up a script and they never heard of you, and your script is longer than 120 pages, they're going to be not take it that seriously, maybe, or unless it's really, really good. But so I think there's a way in which you have to kind of concentrate the story too, and think, what is it about? You know, we have a lot of themes going on in this book, and I personally didn't think about what they were before I started writing it. You know, we just kind of went, and I think it came naturally. You know, these recurring themes and ideas kind of came naturally, and when you saw them and they kind of popped up, you're like, oh, this is something to highlight. That's interesting. But with a screenplay, at least I found that you need to kind of have an idea up front about what is the one thing this story's about above all other things. There's this kind of hyper focus that makes it really difficult. So to find that in your own work, I think might be doubly difficult. I don't know, but I definitely think it could make a good movie.
Right, so I mentioned earlier tonight, I asked one writer, I said, a lot of people will review your book and they'll talk about the themes that are running through the book, and they'll dissect it. And I said, when you sit down to write a novel, do you say, what theme should I have here? And he says, no, I just write a book. And I suspect that that's the same. But what themes emerge then upon hindsight? Or what is the one thing you said that is this book is about?
I don't know the one thing. That's why I don't want to write the screenplay right now. I mean, you could speak
well, there were a couple of themes, and Alex touched on a few of them, and suggested them to me. One is the kind of the endless wars that we're engaged in. That these characters could not have existed in the 1950s, but they can exist now because we've had Iraq, we've had Afghanistan for how many years now? 18 years or something like that. And somebody knows who's counting. But these people are veterans, and the people who populate the book, the Americans who are in Venezuela, the security, the intelligence people, and the embassy people have all they've gone through their tours. They've been in Iraq, they've been in Afghanistan. So it was like this endless war kind of thing. This is kind of what you see. Another theme was that, we're producing a lot of combat veterans. And our bad guy, Captain Kyle Mercer, is also a combat veteran. Obviously, he was Delta Force. He's seen action. He's been shot at. So he has something in common with Maggie Taylor and with Scott Brodie, the two people who are following him, which I thought was kind of interesting. Because when they finally do meet, what they have in common and what they respect in each other is the fact that, we used to say in the Army, same mud, same blood. And we've been there, and these three have been there. Even though they're now on opposite sides, they can respect what each other has done. So that was another theme, and the theme, I think, of also, to some extent, American intervention. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. A lot of people think we should intervene now in Venezuela, but we're not doing it. But there's always that, whenever you're writing a novel, like my last one, Cuban Affair, how much should we be how much should we be intervening in Cuban, politics or Cuban society, or trying to topple the government? So, you write about the world you live in. It's the only world you can write about if you're writing a contemporary novel. And all these things are there, but they can't be there too much because people are going to say, I'm looking for the sex, like get on with it. Or I'm looking for the violence. Nobody's bled yet, and nobody's had sex yet. So, you got to kind of mix it up. And if you do it right, and you pace it right, and you portion it out, it works. And I think this one works.
The novels that you both admired, though, were mostly Cold War novels
Yeah.
set 50s, 60s, 70s, Russia, Moscow, etc. So this one is kind of Afghanistan, the Afghanistan endless war. But is it difficult for a writer now if you don't have the Cold War to go to?
Mm-hmm.
So is it the Middle East? What's the go-to place, or what's the best place to set a thriller like this? Any kind of thriller.
That's a good question. I never did a lot of I really loved Cold War thrillers growing up, and I really did grow up on them. And when I sat down to write one, which was a charm school in 86, 87, and I went to Moscow and Leningrad, and I finished it, and I said to myself, this may be one of the best novels I've ever written. I think I've got a new career here. And then the Cold War ended. And I know at least one novelist who had a half a manuscript when the wall came down. But the reviewers were absolutely ecstatic about this novel. Some of the reviewers said one of the best Cold War thrillers. So right away you think, well, the Cold War, even though one of my characters in the book says communism doesn't have 10 years in it, I said, even if that's true, I've got 10 years, I could write maybe 5 novels. And I was really excited about doing Cold War stuff because it was the battle of the history of the world. 2 superpowers, nuclear armed. What could be more exciting? And it was sex, it was violence, it was everything. And I'm surprised I hadn't done one earlier. But when I did that one, I said, this is how I'm going to move my career now. I am going to become the American Graham Greene, Le Carre, whatever. And then the wall came down. So what are you going to do, But what do you set him now? Much more difficult because you don't have that. The Cold War is over. We have the war on terrorism, and everybody's giving it a shot, and some more successful than others.
The Middle East, but it seems like there's so many changing sides
Right.
there. It's
Right.
in motion. China could be a good place for
Right.
one of your novels. So there are 2 more coming out, by the way, same characters. Second one you're working on now. I asked Alex the other day, or I think I read, that you obviously read spy novels, but you read a lot of, or have been reading a lot of nonfiction,
Yes.
and now you're cast into this fiction writing role. And a thriller role. So there's got to be this page-turning mechanism here to make the reader just want to know what's going to happen next. Great storytelling. What did you learn in the process, if anything, with your dad? And Nelson, I'm going to ask you the same thing after this, but we'll ask Alex. What did you learn in this process about writing and about crafting a novel?
Everything. I came to it, yes, with an idea of structure, with an idea of dialogue and how I enjoy writing dialogue, and also writing prose, which I hadn't done in a long time, but I missed and thought I was okay at, and so I was excited by the prospect of doing that. But I think there's certain things like brought from screenwriting which ended up actually not being very helpful that I think you helped me kind of break the habit of when writing a book. One of which would have been there's this reflex to come into a scene as late as possible and leave it as quickly as possible. Do what it needs to do and then get out. And I did that a few times, and sometimes it worked for pacing, but it doesn't always work. And you have to really think the pacing of a novel, I think, in some ways is more complex. So you were helping me kind of figure out. Well, you actually need to. When these people walk into a room and see each other, that's part of the scene. You need to know what that moment is. And they were talking about this, but what about that? That would come up too. And you can bring the beginning and end of these interactions is really important. So you kind of showed me how the ways to kind of the key scenes needed to be kind of milked in a way. And I think one of the other main things would have been when I was looking at this book from the outline perspective, which I didn't try not to do too often. But when you're in the middle of it, especially the middle of the book is, I think, the hardest thing, like a screenplay, and you're thinking about what's going to happen, what's going to happen, what's going to happen next. There's a few times where I ended up kind of overstuffing it because I was thinking just about plot. I wasn't thinking about the fact that we'd created these interesting characters and the reader's going to be interested and care about them because of who they are. And the story we've already formed is kind of an engine unto itself. You don't have to add even more complications. So I guess it's also the sense of focus and understanding how to focus the book, which I learned from him. And then also just the use of language. I mean, he's done this a lot, and he's obviously very good at it. And I had a lot to learn, and I think I did learn a lot, especially by having my own words edited. I mean, it was like the greatest writing class you can get. Yeah.
Great education.
Yeah.
Nelson, what would you say Alex brought to the project, and what did you get any new perspectives on storytelling or writing?
Well, yeah, I mean, novelists tend to ramble, and, the middle always sags, they say. But, then you can go back and sometimes edit. But with Alex, he did know how to get into a scene. He knew how to get out of a scene. He knew how to make the chapter breaks. Also, he had what do they call it, the arc of the story. There was this, novelists do tend to go, we do a lot of, peripheral stuff just to try to make the novel a little bit more atmospheric or whatever. But with Alex, he did focus on the plot a lot because you have to do that in a screenplay. So I was aware of this. I was aware that he was, going in one direction where I usually wander like that. So sometimes he pulled me back, toward the plot. And also, again, when should a scene end? When should it begin? Usually, that you break them up with chapters. So just knowing I was working with a screenwriter, I think subconsciously, I was thinking cinematic. I was thinking, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, but Scene 1, Act 1, Scene 1, Act 1, Scene 2, etc. I started setting them in my mind, the scenes, and the book, I think, went a lot faster because of it.
If there was going to be a movie made of this, do you have any ideas, the lead characters, who you would like to see play them, or who we might imagine playing them?
Cary Grant, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
reanimated.
It would be very expensive, but worth it.
I don't know any. I don't know any of these. I don't know any modern actors. Well, Julie Christie.
The General's Daughter, I wanted to go back to that. That was your first experience, I take it, with having a book of yours, a story made into film. How did that process go? Any interesting stories out of that process? And did you meet Travolta and the cast?
Yeah. I knew this. I knew the producer, Mace Newfield. I didn't know him well, but he had done a lot of the Tom Clancy books. In fact, he's got the rights to the Tom Clancy character. But I met him somewhere along the line, and then it was an interesting process. It was a process that, if you asked 30 novelists to tell you the story of what happened to their book in Hollywood, you would get 30 of the same stories, not different stories. You get 30 of the same stories, and none of them are good. I had maybe a better experience. Sherry Lansing, who was head of Paramount at the time, who was studio making a movie, was also somebody I knew from New York from the old days before she went to Hollywood. So I had a little bit of a leg up. They invited me to the set. I didn't go for the couple of times. But then they said, we're kind of wrapping the movie here. They were finishing it up in Burbank. They said, we'd really like to have you here for, 5 days, or 4 or 3, but no more than 5. They don't want you around too long. And then somebody told me, when the car picks you up at the airport, if it's a Cadillac or a Mercedes, they like you. But if it's a Rolls, they really like you. But it was a Mercedes. But it was okay. It wasn't the Rolls I expected. But it it was okay. You know, I was on set. But prior to that, even though this was a studio-driven project, it looked like it was going to die because of one bad screenplay after the other. And then they hired at the end William Goldman, who was a novelist, who's written his own screenplays. William Goldman wrote Marathon Man, the book and the movie. And I said to myself, you know, because I have these prejudices about screenwriters maybe, I said, thank God they hired a novelist who knows how to write a screenplay. Alex is now a novelist who also knows how to write a screenplay. But then there wasn't that many around. There was Mario Puzo, there was Michael Crichton. But once William Goldman got into the project, he read the book, read the screenplay, and made all these changes and finally revived this project that was dying. And then when I got on the set, I sat with Travolta, and he had a copy of General's Daughter. And he was all marked. It was earmarked, and he had stickers in it, and he showed me lines that he underlined, and he made a lot of changes on the screenplay too. But he made a lot of them, you know, that Goldman, I guess, agreed with. But it was just serendipitous that he's a very smart man, and Goldman is an incredible writer. And they got this thing. They got to the crux of it. As Alex says, you know, screenplays are 90 pages. It's a minute a page, that's the rule of thumb. Maybe 120 is a 2-hour movie. You got to take a book that takes 16 to 18 hours to read and get it down to 90 minutes. And that's a difficult thing to do. There's a lot of interpretation. A lot of stuff has to be cut. But they were happy with it. We had a good supporting cast. The movie made a lot of money for Paramount. John Travolta got $20 million to play the part. I say $20 million. I did not get $20 million for the rights to the movie rights. They got nowhere near that. And I don't. And as much money as the movie made is creative accounting. That, you know, I never saw another nickel. Neither did anybody else. I don't know how it works in Hollywood, but somehow the producers get rich, the studios get rich. Nobody else, and usually the major actors make money. But it was very successful for for Paramount. Financially and critically, it wasn't that bad. I mean, people took shots at it, but it was a good movie. And then when I wrote the sequel, which was Upcountry, with the Travolta character of Paul Brenner, who goes back to Vietnam, Travolta was supposed to play the part again, but this time Sherry Lansing had left the studio. And as soon as the personnel starts to change at the studio, all projects, you know, that were initiated by the last regime usually wound up being dumped. So that's kind of what happened, even though Travolta swore to me he wants to play this part again. He loved this part. But I think he's probably too old now anyway. But it was a good experience. I went there with the idea that I'm going to come back with a lot of these horror stories that other novelists came back with. But I couldn't think of one except maybe, maybe sitting on the set and watching what was going to turn out to be maybe 1 or 2 minutes of screen time. It was an airport scene, if you remember it, the scene in the airplane hangar when they're putting the body on board. This is maybe 2 minutes of screen time. It took like 7 hours, but this time my eyes were rolling, and I was saying, I can't watch this for another second. It goes on and on and on. They got a big budget, so they're going to burn up the budget. But I'm bored out of my gourd. And then they showed me the what do they call them? The rushes? The
dailies.
The dailies. And I watched it, and it was like over like 90 seconds. I said, that's what we did all day? Well, it was interesting. It was interesting.
That reminded me of a quick anecdote. I was directing my short film. I was out in Easter Long Island, and you came to visit, and we were out. It was like a freezing cold autumn, and we were in the middle of this like field of dead grass, and it was something like a character was crawling through the grass or something. It took forever to set up. We had like a dolly and lights and reflective boards and everything, and you were watching, and then we did the shot. It was about maybe 5-second shot. We had cut, and you said, "That's it." Yeah.
We're going to go to questions and answers in 1 minute, but I wanted to point out, we pointed out Nelson wrote all his books, continues to write with a pencil, #1 pencil,
right.
Legal pad, in something that's called Area 51. You want to describe that to us and why it's called Area 51?
Well, it's just, I think every author has an area that they, maybe not every author. Some authors actually write in cafes now, and but I have to be, by myself. I have a little room that nobody knows where it is except my assistant, and there's just a table up there and a pencil sharpener, research books, a coffee pot, and that's the way I do it. That's the way I've been doing it for years. It's in a small suburban office building, but I'm not in the directory. It's like a CIA thing, where you're not in the direct, where it says something like, ABC Vegetable Company or something. I just took the name off, and my door has no number, so people wandering through the building not likely to stumble onto my little writing space. But I call it area. So my secretary says, where are you going? I said, I'm going to area 51, so she gets it, which means don't call me.
And Alex, once this project here, did you develop a new space to write, or what's your writing space like?
It did. I wrote a lot of it in the library, and at some point joined a workspace which was about 2 blocks from my apartment, which was very convenient because my wife gave birth to our child while I was writing the book. So it was really helpful to be really close to home and then to be able to get back quickly. And now I actually just joined another working space. It's a little further away, but it's like a 24/7 kind of space. There's always a pot of coffee going, and it's good. But I'm around people, which I actually like because it puts pressure on me. I pretend like they're watching me. Yeah.
But you have that coffee thing in common there.
Yeah.
Got to have the coffee. All right. Well, first of all, thank you, gentlemen, for being here tonight in Traverse City and for your time. And we're going to ask for a few more moments.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Oh, no, the lights went up.
And feel free, don't hold back. If you have a question for Nelson or Alex Demillie, feel free to raise your hand. We have traveling microphones.
Okay.
And there are books for sale in the lobby, and you gentlemen will sign a few copies, as many copies as you
Absolutely.
have to. All right, question over here, sir.
Yes, thank you, Ron. I'm just curious, Paul Brennan was such a great character. Is there a reason that he wasn't reintroduced in The Deserter?
That's a good question. Yeah, he could have certainly been that character. Was Army CID. Geez, I wish I'd thought of that. I mean, yeah, it could have. Except for the age. When you're doing a series, and I discussed this with somebody the other day, your character is getting older. But you can't get older, so you're going to freeze them in time. The Paul Brennan books, the two of them, were kind of a specific time and place. Years have gone by, and we want our characters to be in their mid-30s, maybe early 40s, and but I think we could have finessed it. I mean, with the character, when you have a very successful series that lasts like 30 years, 40 years, like Agatha Christie with Poirot. They estimated that when Agatha Christie died and she was still writing Poirot, that Poirot was probably 109 years old at that point. The New York Times estimated they actually did a front page obit on Poirot, not on Agatha Christie. It was kind of clever. But that's everybody who writes a series has that problem. We got to make the decision up front, when is this action taking place? And yeah. I mean, thinking back, we could have used, maybe the paperback. We'll change the name. I don't know. Can we do that?
Well, we have one on the aisle, one in the middle, wherever looks like we're going to get to the middle there.
Oh, the mic is over there.
Nelson, of all the books that you've written, do you have a favorite? And if you do, why?
I do have a favorite. My favorite is the Gold Coast. And why? I've lived on Long Island all my life, and I don't live on the Gold Coast. I live more modestly, and I was now able to make fun of all of these people, all the rich and famous that I've known all my life peripherally. I just had fun with it. It was a very, I'm writing about my neighborhood, and I'm writing about people I know. I didn't think much of it. I mean, I thought, this is going to cause some nonsense. People are going to be upset and whatever, but that's okay. And then the Junior League, invited me to give a talk at one of the clubs represented in the book, the Creek. It's an old, very waspy country club. And I said, yeah, sure. And then somebody called me back, and they said, from the junior league, and they said, well, you're not exactly welcome at the club. This is very embarrassing for us. We don't know what to say. Don't worry about it. So I was banned from, a lot of the, but then, get over it, and now, it's okay. But it was fun exploring, my kind of not near neighborhood, but the other side of the track, so to speak. And it was The Great Gatsby meets The Godfather. I had fun with it.
Questions. I'm getting pointed in that direction right over there. Yes.
Yes, thank you for being here. When I was in Vietnam in 1966, I happened to meet a young Army lieutenant at my Marine Air Base at Marble Mountain.
Yes.
And he was really good at creating words because he used the word "cratchin" a lot to describe a weather situation.
Right.
I was going to ask you, have you ever been on Marble Mountain Air Base, Marine Air Group 16 helicopter base?
No, I don't. Where was it? It was up by Da Nang.
It was up, yes.
Yeah, I flew out of Da Nang. That's as close as I got. My last day in Vietnam was spent in Da Nang, but Kratchen, as we know, is that kind of persistent drizzle that could drive you nuts after a while. I think the Vietnamese word was Kratchen. It sounds like the right word for the stuff falling on your head for day after day and week after week.
Come home.
Welcome home.
Thank you.
All right. Looks like we're going back to our left side. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi, I've read every one of your books, and I think your books
Thank you.
are a combination of sleuth and history. So what catches your eye? Because I enjoy a detective novel, and I also enjoy a historical fiction novel. So how do you decide which of those to pursue?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was a history major in school, so that interested me. And, I thought about doing historical novels, but it just was kind of difficult not difficult, but to reproduce that dialogue, it's like that old dialogue. And, people who do it well really do it well, and they understand, history, how people spoke, and, what they did, what they ate. I didn't feel like going through all that research, because I kind of liked my characters with the kind of wise, maybe wise-ass New York mouth. But so you gotta, but I like to bring history into it. But my editors and some of my, less kind reviewers will say some of my books are too full of history, too full of travelogue, too full of this. Well, okay, I get it. But, I think people who read my books, as yourself, come to expect it. So I'm not changing it. And, it works for me. Thank you.
We have up. Where are we? Upstairs. There we go. Yes. There's no mic up there. Speak up.
Here. No, you got it back here.
Oh, there's the mic. Look at that.
This is a question for Nelson. I aspire to be a writer, but I'm writing a book about the Vietnam War. How do I write aesthetically the war? Because my dad, he was almost sent to Vietnam, even though the war was almost over. But I kind of want to write a novel about the war, but I don't know how to write a novel that's 30 years before I was even born.
Well, I would say read Red Badge of Courage by Bruce. Somebody knows. Kenton, right? He had never heard a shot fired, but he wrote what was maybe one of the best Civil War novels ever written, and I read it when I was young, and I just figured he'd been in the war, but I think he was actually born after the war. He was a very young boy during the war. I mean, if you start off with the Red Badge of Courage, I think that would give you some a confidence that you can write about. A lot of it is imagination, and there are still a lot of older Vietnam veterans around. You interview them, and they'll tell you all you want to know. Good luck.
Thank you, and we'll go to stage right over here. Sir.
Thank you all for coming in tonight. My question has, and Ron Jolly, you had kind of hit on it with a review, and I have not read the book yet, but about endings, it seems like a whole bunch of books that are sequel-based or the characters go on. The ending of each book seems to be very quick and almost unsatisfying. Is that both a screenplay and or novels? Is it just more or less how it goes? Sometimes, like I said, I feel a little dissatisfied at the end of the books, but you know that they're setting you up for the next book.
Well, some of the books are standalones. They're not meant to have a sequel. No, I mean, some books, some authors wrap it up very tightly. It's all wrapped up at the end. And my endings tend to be more ambiguous because that's what life is about. Every novel is a slice of life. You got to start someplace and you got to end someplace. That's why I say you work hardest, I think, on the beginning of the book. The first 10% of the book probably takes 30% of your writing time. And the last 10% of the book is going to take 30% of your writing time. You have a lot more leeway, and you have a lot more, say in how you can do whatever you want to open a book and to let it go along. It's the ending that, when it comes down to the ending, is where, unfortunately, you start to get partners in your writing, like the editor, and the agents. Everybody's all of a sudden interested. And do you find that with movies too?
Well, I think for this book, we didn't really give them time to change it, right?
No,
for the ending, but intentionally.
Yeah.
Well, I would say for this book, we knew, we were hoping anyway, we were going to continue these characters, but we also thought it was really important to make a self-contained story. So there are kind of like meta stories or arcs that are going to go through, but they're not the plot of the book. The plot of the book has an ending, but we do raise certain issues with the protagonists that we want to carry over, obviously. But we also want to make it that each thing can be self-contained. And for films, I think part of the problem right now is that Hollywood is making fewer and fewer movies and making them more and more expensive. And as such, they feel like the Marvel movies are a perfect example, but that's only one example. They constantly need to reference each other. And then I find they're often, or usually not satisfying. Nobody just wants to tell a story anymore with a beginning, middle, and end. Just make a good movie, And even these, any of the fantasy sci-fi stuff that's coming out now, in the new Star Wars movies, there's always a winking nod to some other thing that exists, or they're setting up and making a toy, and it's just, I think it's a little depressing. They just become this product that's made that has a purpose outside of itself, and yeah. It's that's why I think a lot of films don't have the endings that you kind of want.
Questions? I have one over here near a mic, and I'll have one back over here, one here, and one here. So let's see. We'll start back there. And then.
Yes, thank you for writing such a wonderful character as John Corey. Will we be seeing him in any future novels?
Thank you. Who's asking the question? Now I'm getting, okay. There you are. Yeah, John Corey, I was kind of tired of John Corey. But then my accountant said, John Corey is paying the rent, buddy. But every novelist, not every novelist. There's some novelists who really have one string in their bow, and they like their character because, the character is maybe all they know, and I hate to say that, but, I've done standalone books in between John Corey books, but, I kind of sympathize with Conan Doyle. He hated Sherlock Holmes so much he killed him, and he wanted them gone, but then he had to bring them back for obvious reasons. And I've been away from Corey for 2 books now, and the book I'm writing right now is a John Corey book. So that'll be out sometime next year, I think, maybe, or the year after. I don't know.
Okay, we got the signal, so I think
Well,
we can do
this
one
other
more.
lady right here has been,
All right.
but she's right
Here,
up front.
I'll go
so-
one up front here. Oh, you got a mic. Okay. And then we're.
Well, first of all your books are wonderful.
Thank
and,
you.
I
And
appreciate.
she's not a plant.
She's
not a plant.
I'm not a plant.
I don't figure.
But I love and appreciate your research. I can tell, you've been involved in history, and the humor is hysterical.
Thank you.
And but what I really wanted to ask you is how you incorporate the names of your philanthropic, and people can donate, and you will incorporate their names. And have you ever had a name you just can't use, or how do you incorporate that?
Yeah, well, I gave Alex the names for the dessert. I was kind of tired of trying to work these names in there. But years ago, charities would come to me and they said, we'd like to auction off dinner with Nelson DeMille or lunch with Nelson DeMille. It was very flattering. I don't know. My friends didn't even want to have dinner with me, but all right, But it worked. I mean, these charities were getting up to $10,000 for dinner with Nelson DeMille. Always a nice restaurant, and usually a party of 4 or 5 people. But it was just starting to get you never knew who you were going to wind up having dinner with. And I'm very philanthropic. I want to do this for the charities. Then one day I was having a drink with my good buddy Susan Isaacs, who you might know from Compromising Positions and a few other novels. And she said, oh my God, you're still doing dinner with it? She said, no, there's something better. It's called character in a book. You don't have to go to dinner with anybody. Charity sells the character. So we started doing that, and it really worked. It started working well. It's gone for up to, I think, $20,000. Somebody donated to the American Cancer Society, have their name, or in this case, I think it was a son's name in the book. And it worked, people were named Ted Haggerty, it worked fine. But then we started getting weird names. And one of them we had a couple of East Asian names. And the book said it, like this one is set in Venezuela. It was kind of hard to work it in. I gave Alex a bunch of them. I still have a backlog of about 7 or 8 of them. But it is a good way to raise money for charity. Editorially, it's a little bit more. It takes a little bit more time than you really want it to take. But when I weigh that against dinner, I say we can do this.
All right, we have time for one more question, and you've had somebody over here. And
hi, thank you for taking this last question. Charm School was brilliant, and I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the hope that it certainly gave me that something not so tragic might have happened to a lot of the MIAs.
Right.
My question is, was that uniquely your idea, or was there conjecture at the time or something to allude that there might be something like that going on in the Soviet? Yeah, well, I mean, how many people have read The Charm School? Okay, most people. So I won't go through the whole plot, but it had to do with American MIAs, people missing in action in Vietnam, winding up in the Soviet Union in a place called the Charm School. And how it came about was, I said I was an infantry officer, but one day I needed to go someplace, and I left the field, and I was on Highway 1, and we were going through Wei Fu Bai. I'm sure there's veterans here remember Wei Fu Bai Air Base, and I had to take a plane someplace. But I went to the officers' club. Whenever you go to a base, you go to the officers' club because it's air conditioned and the beer is cold. And I was sitting there with these guys who were jet pilots, and they were fascinated that, most infantrymen would never wind up in this place, and they wanted to know all about what I did, and I was more fascinated by what they did. They thought what I was doing was dangerous. I think it was dangerous enough,
These guys were, bomber pilots. And so, long story short, I finally got around to them saying, we've seen some of our comrades bailing out, over North Vietnam, and obviously unhurt, but never appearing on any POW lists. And I said, well, what do you think would happen to them? I figured they were executed on the ground. And they said, no, we think that they're going to the Soviet Union to train, to forcefully made to train Red Air Force pilots in American tactics and how we dogfight, whatever we do, because they said we're seeing that the MiG pilots that we're coming up against are better than they used to be. So this was their conjecture, and I'm saying, boy, this is either true or you guys should all be novelists, It's like. But it made sense that, the Russians were giving the North Vietnamese the surface-to-air missiles that they were using to shoot down American planes. And what did the Russians want in return? North Vietnamese had no money. What did they want in return? They wanted the product of those missiles, which were downed American pilots. And it stayed with me. And this is what I heard in like April of '68, having a beer with these guys. And like 30 years later, when I was looking for, a Cold War, well, 20 years later, middle 90s, looking for a Cold War themed espionage kind of novel, that popped into my head. It never actually left my head because there was so much talk about the MIAs after the war. Where do they go? Where do they go? And I never heard that ever said publicly, either in the media or anybody speculating. But I said I'd heard something that was so strange that it may be true. But so anyway, I use it from that's where that came from. Ideas for novels come from strange places, usually bars, I should say.
All right, thank all of you for being here, and let's give it up for our
Thank
special
you.
guests,
Thank you,
Nelson
everybody.
and Alex Demillie. Thanks for coming to Traverse City.